So yeah, test next week, 5 and 6.5, security related, and so then chapter 6 had to do with the internet. So we discussed that. We just had the quiz on the different layers. We talked about the origins of the internet at the beginning. What's some things that when we talked about the origins of it that we discussed? Where did it start?
It started with the ARPA.
ARPA, right? It was ARPA first, and then
DARPA.
and then DARPA, right? What did the D stand for when they added that?
It was like the
Defense, right? Because it was part of the Department of Defense.
And it was founded in like 1969.
69, that's right. That was the first instance, right there at the end of the 60s. But when we talked about those two guys, does anybody remember the two guys' names that were sort of the fathers of the internet?
Bob Kahn, one of them?
Bob Kahn, and then the guy that we saw in the video. Vint Cerf. Yep. So Bob Kahn and Vint Cerf, those are like the architects of the internet that we have today. They were kind of the ones that founded that. And that was kind of really more in the 70s when that stuff was taking place, and they came up with TCP. And so when we talk about the Internet Protocol Suite, one of the things that we said is sometimes that's referred to as the DoD model, right? Because it was part of the Department of Defense when it was created. Who knows what that original name was of that first kind of instance? The Internet before it was known as the Internet. No one knows? Nobody remembers that?
ARPANET.
ARPANET, yeah, ARPANET. Aiden was just being polite and giving you guys a chance. So ARPANET, that was the original name. Like I said, the Internet Protocol Suite, also known as the DoD model or the TCP/IP model, is another name that you might hear for that. So we discussed that, and we discussed the application layer. That was sort of in the first portion, and then there's the stuff that we just had the quiz over. All right, so Lord willing, that will be next week. What I wanted to just kind of talk to you guys about real quick before we sort of just kind of dip our toe into chapter number 7 is that we have a project this semester. All right? A project you guys are going to, there's a presentation aspect to this project, but it will not be you all by yourself. Okay? So we have a nice a number that's easily divisible in here. We have 16 students, so here's what you need to be thinking about. I want each team to have 4 students. All right, so groups of 4. In these teams, what we want to happen is I want to kind of give you guys some exposure to what it's like if you were to work in the computer science field. Right, what it's like to work for a company that's building software or something like that, and kind of the different roles that are involved in that. So obviously, we know typically when you think of computer science, you only think of one thing. What is it that everybody thinks is computer science? Coding. You think it's coding, right? Programming. It's a programming class, right? It's like, whoa, there's way more to it than just the programming aspect. That's just really one part of it. And so when you're building an application, someone's got to be in the nuts and bolts of that and actually putting the application together, writing the code, right? Sitting the long hours at the computer with their Diet Coke, like Dennis in the first Jurassic Park, check the vending machine. Someone's hitting the vending machine so they can come back with their Diet Coke and whatever, peanuts or candy bars so they can keep going, hours and hours and hours in front. There are the nerds that are responsible for that, right? And I say that affectionately because I was one of those nerds. But I was never a Diet Coke fan. So there's somebody that's doing the coding side, but that's not all that's involved in it. So typically, here's what I want our teams to be divided in. You're going to have the developer, and the developer is the coder, right? It's the programmer. Programmer would be another name for that, or coder, whatever you want to use, right? That's the person that's writing the code that understands the nuts and bolts of the application. But then there are 3 other roles that are really important that are just as much a part of this software development lifecycle that I want, and we could actually bring more roles into this. But the roles that I'm going to include are, we're going to have a business analyst. Does anybody Anybody want to take a stab at what a business analyst does? Anybody familiar with that?
They analyze business.
I was gonna say that.
Deep. That's what Brady was gonna say. You beat him. You had him by half a second. Anybody else wanna? You wouldn't be wrong, but what does that mean exactly?
Could they promote or like try to sell whatever the developer's doing?
Sell what the developer's doing?
Well, not like sell it, like market it. So like say he's making an app and then he could make the business analyst be like, hey, this app would be working well with this type of community or this type of.
Okay. Well, yeah. So when you think about business, you know, there is it's kind of a loose term. Like this app is to be used for some business need, right? There's some particular role in the organization you're going to use this app for. And so when we talk about a business analyst in here, that's going to sort of be the person that's putting together the requirements for the application. Okay?
Like terms and agreement type stuff.
Well, not just terms and agreements, but they're actually the one that's sort of sitting with the customer and going, okay, we're going to need a panel that does this in the app, right? We're sort of, they're working closely with the developer. They're also working with the customer to figure out what are the requirements for this application going to be. Okay, so the business analyst is going to be, the focus of our business analyst and our project is going to be requirements. They're figuring out from the customer what this application should do, and they're sort of writing some documentation so that the developer can then take that and say, okay, I got to build a screen that does this. All right, they may not necessarily know how it's going to do it. Some business analysts have already worked in the programming world, so they can talk very intelligently to you about the programming side of things and say, you know, maybe you want to use this feature in the language that we're building this with, or whatever. Not all of them, but some of them know that. But they're going to be sort of responsible for the requirements for our application. So overall, you know, the idea is we're building an application, all right, some sort of application. And that's going to be sort of part of your project, coming up with what type of application you're going to build, all right? So you guys will be working together to sort of figure that out. When I said there's 4 roles, we're going to be missing a role, so I'm going to serve as the 5th role, and that is I'm going to be the customer. All right? Mr. Walker is the customer, which makes sense because I'm the guy you have to please, right? I'm the one that's going to give you the grade when it's, did you satisfy the requirements or not, right? Yes, Josh.
Am I allowed to buy Aiden to my team?
I'd like to buy it.
Yeah, can I borrow your Aiden,
Let the bidding begin.
$50.
Yes.
Can we include complimentary coffee in our app idea?
Stop trying to wrap it.
No.
Well, you know, you definitely may have a meeting, right? You invite the customer to the meeting, and maybe you bring coffee and donuts and stuff like that. So
What if
sure.
like you sign up for the app and you get automatically free coffee?
Yeah.
No. Well, I'm just saying, like, as an idea.
No.
Hey,
It's good though. The wheels are already turning, right? There's lots of options that you can do here. So the business analyst is going to be putting the requirements together. Okay. There's another role called the project manager. All right, so someone's going to have to do that. And the nice thing about having these different roles here is these aren't all. One of the things that you may be starting to find out. Sorry, my roof of my mouth is itchy. Something's causing my allergies to fire up. Is that you may or may not be a programmer type, right? You may be the guy that says, you know, I've seen just enough to know that I don't want to do this. And that's fine. Because there's lots of other roles in this world besides just the person that wants to sit down and write code, right? And so the project manager, this is someone that's got great organizational skills. This is the person, they're also interfacing with the customer a lot. But they're making sure the project stays on track. Right? You've got deadlines, you've got certain things you need to accomplish by this time. Project managers are setting up meetings to bring kind of the whole group together, make sure we're all on the same page, that type of stuff, all right? So this is the person keeping us on track, keeping us organized, and on track. All right. And then, what do you guys think we need last of all? There's actually multiple things that we could add to this, but anything in particular come to mind? Yes.
Investor?
No, not for this. That could be a part of it, but yeah, for this one, that's not. Yes.
Marketer?
No, that could be. That's what I'm saying. There's all kinds of things we could add to this, but when I'm thinking about typically our little team for applications that we built, I'm thinking about 4 particular roles that were pretty much always there. There's kind of a 5th one that if we had 20 people in here, I might would add that 5th person. But yes.
Is it the person who does like the, it's like what Nat and Ray did, the like.
Yeah, the UI.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of struggling with that. So and since we've had some creative aspects to this particular, we've had some creative parts in this class here. I might make this last one optional. Okay, I think I'm going to give you 2 options with that. Either this last role needs to be the graphic artist. All right. So responsible for UI. What do I mean by UI?
User interface.
The user interface. That's what this thing's going to look like, right? Their job is to make the app look pretty. All right. Some apps you don't care so much about that, but I will tell you from experience, it's always good to have somebody there that you can kind of say, hey, kind of look over this and see if you can make some suggestions, because what we programmers come up with can be kind of scary. Makes perfect sense to us. To the average person, they go, I never would have thought to click there to be able to do this, So somebody that's responsible for not only making it look pretty, but making sure that it makes sense, right? So make it look pretty and functional. And then the other optional role that no one mentioned is going to be the QA analyst. All right, so if you've got a team of 4 and there's no one that's like, I'm the creative person and I want to be in charge of the graphic artist part, they can be QA analysts. And so what does the QA analyst do? Anybody have any idea? What does QA stand for? No. I heard question and answer. Did anybody say anything different? Quality assurance. All right. So this is the person that's doing the testing. They're looking for bugs. They're trying to break it, right? Test application. And so before you turn it over to the client to use, right, or the customer, if there's a broad customer base or whatever, before it goes to them, the QA analyst job is, like I said, trying to expose any bugs so that they can give that feedback back to the developer and we can work out the kinks before the product goes live. All right? Does that make sense? Do those roles make sense to you? Kind of the high level versions of those roles, right? So these roles will definitely be there, right? And then one of these will be your 4th one. All right. If we end up having a bigger class on some of the ones in the future, we might be able to split those out. So not only do you need to start thinking about the 4 people that you're going to get together with, I really debated whether I should just assign you guys roles, because that way it kind of takes the guesswork out of it. Sometimes the hard part in picking the teams is people feeling comfortable going up saying, hey, you want to be on a team together? So I could have taken that awkwardness out of it, but then at the same time, you guys might hate me because of the person that I put you with. You're like, I really don't like that person. But that could be a good character building experience, right?
What about, I'm not thinking of anyone in specific, but like, what if you end up with like a team and like the rest of the team pulls one person back who's doing a good job,
right?
And he gets a bad grade.
So that's the whole part of that's part of what comes out when you work with a team, because that's real life. That's real life, right? Sometimes you're on a project for stuff like this, and there's that one guy, you're like, that guy's not getting his stuff done. And so it's causing more work for the other people because they're not doing their job, right? And so that's a dynamic that would kind of be good for us to sort of work through on your teams, right? You're holding one another accountable. You have those hard conversations with one another whenever you're like, listen, this is your job here, and I need you more here. I can't do that and this, and so I need, this is what I would like to have from you in order to do my job more effectively. And so have those types of conversations, right? We're not going to have time to really get deep into the weeds with this, but you need to be thinking about those roles. You need to think about who you want to work with. You know, try to get teamed up. If you can't find someone, come to me, and I will start assigning based on who's left, right? But I would like you guys to start thinking about this, and I would like to, at a minimum, right? Why did I pick that marker? Today is the
23rd or
4th. Yes, because next week's the 31st. So let's say
Could be randomized.
let's say by next week. Let's go ahead by what'd you say?
Could be randomized.
Randomized. Plug it in and just see what the computer spits out. Right? Yes.
What language are we using?
We're not actually going to code the language because we haven't learned the code yet, right? So we don't have to worry about that. You could pick a language and say that this thing's written in this, but here's the thing: nobody's actually going to have to do any coding. All right.
What do I need agents for?
Exactly. Now all of a sudden, Joshy's like, wait a minute, I want to keep my $50. You know. So you don't actually have to do any coding, but the programmer is going to be the programming-minded guy, right? It's going to help. When you're doing your presentation, somebody's got to kind of talk to the technical details of the application, right? Yes.
Could we theoretically code something?
You can absolutely code something if you actually want to code something. That's fine. That's fine because you're going to have to talk about it technically, and what better way to talk about it technically than to say, here it is, and here's how we did this, right? But yeah, so we don't have time to really do a full project, and I wouldn't expect you to yet because we haven't even really learned any code yet, right? But you're thinking you've got these hats on, right? Depending on the road, depending on your role, you're thinking about that. And so here's what I would like to have by next week. By next week, need to know your team. Okay? I need to know your team because I need to know who doesn't have a team by next week. Because then the randomizing process will begin. All right? Again, I've tried to purposely sort of make this class lighthearted and we all have fun together, and so we would hopefully be at a point by this time that we sort of are feeling more comfortable around one another. You know, it wasn't something I wanted to do at the beginning of the year before we got to know one another. You have a question? For the graphic artist part? Absolutely, you're allowed to do that, right? You're definitely going to have to present us with some sort of graphical presentation of what your application looks like, right? I'm not expecting you to write the code to make it work. And you know, if someone picks the graphic artist role, I'm not expecting you to just super wow us with what you come up with. But yes, you're going to be responsible for presenting what it looks like. That's going to be your function and your role. All right. But like I said, if you have a team that no one's graphically inclined, no one kind of has that creative bone, then just make someone in the QA analyst. All right. We're kind of removing that piece of it so no one will stress over that. But I need to know your team by next week, all right? By 2, so this is 131. By, 2/7 then? Is that right? Would be the following Monday?
Yeah.
So 2/7, by 2/7 need, huh?
Yeah.
We were all right. We agree.
Okay, all right, good.
The council.
So by 2/7, I need to know high level description of app. All right, the type of app that you want to build, what the function of it is. Because remember, I'm the customer. And so I've got to be telling you guys, somebody's got to be interfacing with me so that I can tell you guys what I'm expecting the app to do, right? So we're gonna kind of go through these, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna provide class time for you guys to be able to work on this. All right. So we can kind of split up into various areas, and it'll probably be really noisy and all that kind of stuff. But I can sort of float around as the customer, and you guys can interface with me and that sort of stuff. Because I'm going to be grading you, not just on the final finished presentation, but I'm going to be grading you on you guys working together, right? Working together as a team, because this is what you got to do if you work in this field. You got to be able to do that. You know, as much as the developer wants to be the shy guy that sits in the corner that nobody talks to, he's going to have to talk to people, right? And so we're gonna kind of break down those barriers and sort of get a little bit of taste of that. But the good news is, if you're the person that's terrified with standing up in front of the room all by yourself in front of everybody, you're not going to have to do this, right? You're part of a group, you're part of a team, so you're going to present your final project to the class as a whole, right? Once it's all said and done. All right, makes sense? We will definitely, there probably will have to be some communication outside of class as well. And so, you know, you've already got a way to do that through Google Classroom. There's ways for you to interact like that. But there, you know, totally, if you guys want to say, hey, we're all going to meet at the coffee shop at this time and talk through some stuff or whatever, you're welcome to do that kind of stuff as well. But I want to try to provide some stuff in class, and then you're also going to have some communication outside of class as well. All right, so is that enough information to kind of at least get the wheels turning, the ball rolling in your minds?
I am kind of confused about one thing. So if there's no like programming involved, how are we supposed to build?
Well, again, you're not building a functioning application. Okay, that is not the goal here. The goal here is to, but you can present the way the application is supposed to work without it actually working, right? So on the graphical side of things, like you could present it to us just through a PowerPoint presentation, put together some slides and say, here's what happens when you go to screen 1 or screen 2 or whatever, you know, you could show it to us like that. If you don't have a graphic artist, then I'm not expecting much from that. But if you have a graphic artist, you'll probably have a prettier presentation. There's different options for presenting that. And as you guys tell me what app you're trying to do, maybe I'll have some suggestions too on how you might go about that. Brady.
So basically, how it's going to work is like the business analyst, you're going to tell us what we have to do, and then the business analyst is going to tell us what we have to do from what you have to do.
The business analyst is going to tell us what?
He's going to tell like the group what to do from what he asked you.
What they talked to me about. That's right. So they're going to communicate that to me. Yep.
And then the developer's basically just making an idea, coming up with some sort of idea that sort of works within the requirements,
Yep.
but has a special purpose.
That's right.
And
So, yep. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Anything
I was
else?
saying, and you don't have to like actually program. You just have to have the idea and explain like how it works. Right?
That's right. Now, something that might help you is what we're about to talk about in chapter 7 is we're going to start talking about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. All right? Which is really going to be, I mean, those areas are going to be a big part of the focus of the class next year. All right? Because we're focusing on web development specifically. So, I don't want to lock you guys into just doing a web application. If you decide our application is going to be a phone app and this is what it does, and like I said, you want to do a PowerPoint presentation that kind of shows the different phone screens or something like that, that's cool. But you will at least have some more tools in your arsenal by the time this project is due, because we will have talked about HTML, CSS. You can even build some simple pages if you wanted to. You'll have a little bit of exposure to JavaScript, so you can talk, especially if you've got somebody in your group that's maybe done a little programming before. You can talk about this stuff from kind of a programming mindset, you know. So I'm expecting the programmer to sort of think about logically how you're going to group the functions, you know, within your code together. Like we're going to have, maybe you tell me there's a function that's going to sort of handle this piece of it. It's sort of the abstraction stuff that we're talking about. But talk to me about how your code sort of abstracts out the different functions or something like that. It's really, you're going to have a lot of flexibility, and you're going to see that as we get into the project. But at least if you know 4 of you get together and it's like none of us have ever programmed before, I'm not expecting you to give me some programming, right? I'm just expecting you to kind of logically think through the process of how the program would work. Okay? Any other questions? All right. Yes.
Can we have like a demonstration before like the like have it like a television ad like, wow, I really wish I could use so and so. Well, now you can.
Yeah, I would love to see, you know, part of what you guys are going to be graded on is kind of the creativity of the whole thing. So You know, anything you want to do like that to add to the creativity of the entire process, that would be wonderful. All right. And so you're going to be up here for the time, right, presenting this thing to the entire class. And what I'm expecting to happen is, as you guys are presenting this, you're not going to be by yourself speaking, but everybody's got to speak about something. All right. So as you present the final thing, you guys are going to identify who played what role, and then probably appropriate to that role, you're going to speak to some part of the presentation. Okay. Make sense?
We're bringing like props.
You can bring props. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do. So this is supposed to be fun, right? The idea is that this is this should be a fun experience. It should be something that's it's not intended to be stressful, but it just kind of gives you a little bit of visibility into what it's like to work in an industry. You know, not necessarily a company that focuses specifically on computer science type stuff. But all of these big companies have IT departments. All of these big companies have people that are building applications, right? So there are roles in all types of companies that do all sorts of different things where, you know, these roles are valid, right? You'll find people that perform that task inside those companies. So it'll maybe open your eyes to some of the other options if you're going, yeah, I tried SQL and that wasn't my thing, so I don't think I want to program, right? There are other things that you can do in the computer science realm. All right, so more to come on that, but that's at least enough information to sort of get your mind thinking and get you started down that path. And we'll discuss this more as it gets closer. But make sure that you have these 2 dates in mind. All right. Next week I want to hear your groups, because if you don't have a group by next week, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to either that evening or on Tuesday, I'm going to randomly choose a group for the remaining students that don't have a group. All right? And then it's going to be up to you guys. By 2/7, I need to have a high-level description of your app and I keep picking the wrong marker. And know who is responsible for each role. All right. So next week, I should have the team, so you guys can go ahead and start thinking about the next thing if you already got a team in mind. If you don't have a team next week, that day, probably that day, before we leave class, I want to make sure you know who your team members are, so that you'll have a week to kind of touch base and figure out who's going to do what your app's going to be, right? So this stuff doesn't need to be detailed. I just need to know we're going to build, I don't know, anybody got an app in mind? An application for, it can be huge, right? It can be, you could be planning on worldwide domination with this app, or it could be really tiny and say, hey, you know, we work for a company and the garbage isn't getting taken out. So we're going to write a scheduling app for who's going to take the garbage out. What?
Have you ever heard of like PhotoMath? It's like a math, it's like you take a picture of the math problem that solves it out for you. Well, I was going to say you can make one for science problems. You guys know what it is.
Yeah, so like a science problem.
Because I don't think we're supposed to like make another app like made, right?
Well, I don't have a problem with you making an app that's already made, because even though that app's already made, you haven't thought through this process. You haven't thought what would be involved if I'm working with a customer, because I can guarantee you that as the customer, I'm going to throw you some curves, right? From what you're thinking with the app. It's like, well, I really would like it to do this. This is really important. And you'll be surprised when you're working with customers, the things that they're like, this has got to be in there, right? If there's not a blue dot at the bottom right of my app, I'm not going to be satisfied, right? So there's crazy things sometimes. Yes.
When do we get to know like the requirements of what needs to be included?
Well, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through this process just like you would on a normal application. I'm giving you guys the flexibility of deciding on the application. Like with the group that I used to work with, typically what would happen is someone would come to us. They knew that we built products, and so they would say, hey, we have a need in our department of this here. And so they had the requirements. The customer sort of had in their mind what they wanted, but often the customer wasn't very technical, so they couldn't talk about it necessarily in a way that you know the programmer was going to need at the end of the day to be able to do his job. And so there would be discussions with project managers and business analysts with the customer to kind of figure out exactly what they needed and pull out that technical information and then translate that and bring it back to the developer and say, hey, this is technically what we need to happen. Even though the customer just says, you know how someone enters their number here and then magically this pops out? Well, someone else can translate that to what that means from a developer standpoint, okay? So you're going to come up with the idea, but then it's the conversations with me that's going to produce the actual requirements for your application. Now, were you talking about requirements for your individual app or requirements for the project?
I didn't know if there was like requirements that needed to be in the specific like application. Like if there were any specific requirements for this has to, this has to be a feature, that has to be.
Oh yeah. No, that'll vary depending on the type of app that you're building. Okay, and so that's going to kind of come out, and there will be some key things, like I said, that are going to be important to you guys. That it's like the customer said it had to do this, so here's how we accomplish that. Okay. All right. So you got those dates in mind? So if you don't have your team next week, the plan will be by the end of the day for you to have a team when you leave here. And then by the following week, you guys need to at least chat either after class or connect sometime during the week so make sure that you can contact one another. You know the best way to do that. But figure out what your app is going to do and then who's going to play each role. Okay? All right. So let's we're just about out of time, but we can at least kind of touch base with the topic of web design. And the emphasis of chapter 7 is only on the HTML, CSS side. I think chapter 8 is JavaScript. So chapter 8 introduces you to the programming side. So what should happen is before we get before the project is due, we should have at least made it into some of the programming chapters, so you've had some exposure to that. But HTML, we talked about HTML. Does anybody remember what HTML stands for?
Hypertext markup language.
Hypertext markup language. That's right. By the way, I am this video is gonna be online, so if you guys have questions about this going forward, it'll be online. If you need to jump on there to just kind of see the things that we discussed. Hypertext markup language, exactly. That is, we said it's not really a programming language. When we talked about that, it's just it's really a way to define we used to would have said the presentation, but now that cascading style sheets are involved in this, presentation may not be the best term to use. It's the way that the page is going to be organized. But even that, you can do some crazy things with applying particular styles to your page that can make the organization look very different than maybe it did when it was put together in HTML. But you define certain sections of your page with HTML, and you can define. HTML allows you to do things like define what text is going to be a link to another page. It lets you specify text that's important by identifying it maybe as being a header, or that this text should be bold or strong, somehow stand out from other text, be italicized, things like that. You define which sections are paragraphs, versus headers, like I said. HTML gives you the ability to define things as a list, like an ordered or an unordered list. So you have bulleted points, in your page, or numbered points in your page, things like that. So those are some of the things that we kind of think through as we talk about HTML. In addition to stuff like building forms, there are particular HTML tags for what I mean when I say a form, when I'm talking about web pages. Filling out information, right? So like maybe when you're buying something off of Amazon and you have to enter in your address, you're filling out a form, an HTML form by doing that, right? You put your name and your street address and all that kind of stuff, your phone number. When you fill out your credit card information, you're filling out an HTML form. So that's a part of HTML as well. Forms, tables are a part of HTML also. I don't know how much of this stuff we're going to get to in here, but we're definitely going to dig into all of that stuff next year. And so, if you have tabular data, HTML allows you to organize that tabular data in rows and columns, kind of like what we saw with spreadsheets, or like what we talked about with databases. So HTML is useful for that. So you sort of organize the page with HTML, And then CSS is really the part that makes it look pretty, right? CSS is what you use to style the page. It really is. It's like the presentation layer, if you will, of what you're building in HTML. So we're going to discuss both in this particular chapter here. But something that's going to be important for us is to have an editor that we can use to work with this stuff. All right. And so, in the interest of all of us being on the same page, I would like for all of us to have the same editor. All right. So your assignment, part of your assignment for this week, and there's not much of an assignment this week because you're going to be preparing for your test next week. You're going to be starting to think about this, from the project standpoint. I would suggest if you already know your team, get a jump on this and start talking about applications and kind of throwing out ideas there, so that you can present that to me. But by the way, when I say I need to know the description of your app, I'm expecting this, in an email or submitted on Google Classroom, something like that. I need something kind of formal so I can review it and approve it, or give suggestions on how we can improve it. But what was I talking about? So I want us to all install the same app for modifying, for creating HTML and creating cascading style sheets, and we're going to use the same app for JavaScript. And it's just an editor, it's just a text editor, but it's called Notepad++. Has anybody ever heard of that? Anybody ever used Notepad++? Yep. I'm kind of struggling with this one, and we might actually, when we jump to, when we do the class next year, I'm debating on using Visual Studio Code instead. So I'm sort of back and forth between the two, but I want you to see both of these editors. In fact, we may use both in here, but to start with, again, just so that we're all on the same page, we're going to start with Notepad++, okay? This chapter spends a significant amount of time talking about Dreamweaver. Who's familiar with Dreamweaver? You've heard of that? Aiden has. Anybody else heard of Dreamweaver? Yeah. So that's Adobe's tool. It was initially, I think Dreamweaver was originally developed by Macromedia. Macromedia was who originally came out with Flash, which is even around now. But I loved Flash when it first came out. That was so much fun to work with when that was first kind of came on the scene. And you can do a lot of that stuff in HTML5 now. So Flash sort of went away because there are ways to do it in HTML. Anyway, Adobe Dreamweaver, we have the same problem with that we have with Photoshop. It's not free, right? And like Adobe does not give you an easy way to get a free copy. Like if they would give us a 30-day trial, we would be in good shape in here. We could use a 30-day trial. I don't know why they won't do that, because to me it would be excellent for classroom type stuff like this, because if you do a 30-day trial, that actually gives you time to check it out and use it in the classroom. And if at the end of 30 days you're going, this is really cool, I want to build more web pages with this, well, Adobe just made money, right? Because now you're going to have to sign up to be able to get it. But they don't even have like a monthly way for us to purchase Dreamweaver. It's like we'd have to do a year-long subscription. We could pay it monthly, but you'd have to do a year-long subscription. So we're not even going to delve into the Dreamweaver world. And that's fine, because really, even using a tool like Dreamweaver, I've used Dreamweaver before. I used to use it a lot. And it was helpful for doing certain things, to being able to set up web pages quickly. And it would build the HTML behind the scenes for you. But here's inevitably what always happened with Dreamweaver, as what happens with all of these tools. Sometimes the HTML that it builds is confusing, and if there's a problem, if you can't get it to do what you want it to do, you don't know how to go in there and tweak the raw HTML to fix it unless we build it like we're going to build it, which is we're just going to do it by hand. Right? But the nice thing about a tool like Notepad++ is if it knows it's an HTML file, it will color code the tags so they sort of stand out from other stuff. So we'll have some color coding, some kind of auto-complete stuff that it'll do for us that'll make it a little bit easier to work both with HTML, CSS, and also recognizes JavaScript. So it'll be a good tool to use for that. And like I said, we may switch to VS Code. Maybe when we go to JavaScript, we'll switch to VS Code just so we can see that as well. But you could use either tool. They work. They're both just kind of glorified text editors. It's just JavaScript, VS Code, especially when you start doing coding with other languages, will allow you to compile and stuff like that from within VS Code. So that's a nice addition. And it's definitely got more code support than Notepad++ does. The IntelliSense in VS Code is really nice, which is where it'll sort of suggest things to do, when you're writing in a particular language. But really, we didn't get into chapter 7 at all today. So I'm gonna have you guys just read sort of the introduction at the beginning. He talks about Notepad++ and the editors. So it'll just be like the first 2 pages, just to kind of introduce the topic to you. He mentions a product called Adobe Brackets, which is a free download. This doesn't exist anymore, so we can't download that one. I was interested in that. I had never actually heard of that, and I thought, well, cool, maybe they have a free WYSIWYG editor. Who knows what WYSIWYG stands for? What you see is what you get. So it's a way to do something graphically, and then it creates the HTML behind the scenes. Yeah, it doesn't exist. So we're gonna focus on Notepad++. So you guys make it a point to install that on your system by next week, and bring your laptop.
Alright,
We haven't really, said, okay, this week everybody have their laptops because we're going to work on something together. We're going to do that next week, all right? So it's going to get a bit more fun now. And you were wondering, hey, you said we need a laptop for this class. When are we going to need it? Now you need it, all right? You guys have a good day, and Lord willing, I'll see you next week.
Aiden, listen to me. Aiden, you know,